of the financial crisis, and you have previously called for reform, stating that we need to move to a system that attracts ample amounts of private capital to stand between housing sector credit risk and the taxpayers. A nationalized mortgage market is an unsustainable status quo, obviously, from a moral hazard perspective on this thing. And sadly, the situation we find ourselves in today was a predictable one. In 2003, I introduced legislation, and again in 2005, which would have reined in the GSEs, allowing them to be regulated at that time for systemic risk. Then Fed Chairman Greenspan backed the amendment, but it was not enough to overcome the outsized political pressure brought by the GSEs themselves. To be fair, you said last summer that this was not a normal issue on which the Fed would comment, but that we are in a now or never moment for reform, as there is not a current risk with a healthy economy now and the housing system. How long will this now or never moment last, and what are the consequences of inaction on this?
I think now continues to be a good time to move forward on this. It is one of the big pieces of unfinished business from the crisis. It is unsustainable to have effectively the U.S. housing finance system on the government's books for the long run, and it's not healthy. So, I don't know how much longer. I think we're going to need to address this. I assume we will at some point, and I would just say the sooner the better.
Let me ask you another question on this front. Chairman Greenspan often commented on the role of the GSEs in our economy. In 2004, in testimony before the Senate, he said, "Concerns about systemic risk are appropriately focused on large, highly leveraged financial institutions such as the GSEs to fend off possible future systemic difficulties, which we assess as likely if the GSE expansion continues unabated. Preventative actions are required sooner rather than later." Those were his words in 2004, ominous words, no doubt. Today, pressure is being brought on the administration to release the GSEs out of conservatorship. Although I oppose this move absent congressional action, I am hopeful that if this were to occur, there is no doubt today that Fannie and Freddie, given their size and role in the housing market, would be regulated as systemically important. Do you share this view?
So the form in which this reform takes place will, of course, be up to you, not to us, and it's not in our lane. I would say, I would really hope that that these institutions would not be systemically important at some point. I would think when we get to when you figure out a process that where they can be moved off the balance sheet, the idea would be that they would not present systemic risk, ideally.
Let me move to another question, Chairman Powell. Earlier this year, this committee passed legislation that would reverse a previous SEC rule requiring that certain money market funds float the NAV. I certainly remember when the Federal Reserve Fund broke the buck in 2008. I remember where I was when that occurred. And the massive backstop the U.S. taxpayers provided to restart the entire market as a result of this and other factors. The fact is that the value of the underlying assets of those products fluctuate. They go up and down. As I said in opposition to the bill at the time, if we learned anything from the financial crisis, it should be that the price should reflect risk. While understanding this is the primary jurisdiction of the SEC, and Chairman Clayton has already expressed his concerns, I was hoping as a member of the FSOC and as someone uniquely positioned to comment on macro financial stability that you could comment on any concerns with this potential move.
I very much share your concerns. This was one of the many critical weaknesses identified in our financial system during the crisis. We worked hard to address it, I think successfully to some extent, and I'd not like to see that undone.
Chairman Powell, I'm out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.